weapons of conflict. Richard Roth, CBS.
The town of Prizren was nearly deserted. Despite warnings from NATO and international aid organizations and the ever-present danger of landmines, thousands of refugees have left their camps in Macedonia and Albania to head for home. For the Kosovars who've arrived back in Prizren, it doesn't seem to matter much who freed the city. They cheer as loudly for the German Bundeswehr soldiers as they do for the Kosovo Liberation Army, the KLA. Looking around the town, it quickly becomes clear that the KLA fighters in their ragtag uniforms feel comfortable in their self-appointed role as victors. When asked who liberated Kosovo and who is now in charge, they make it clear they think it was them. But they wouldn't speak to Deutsche Welle. We waited 2 hours only to be told the interview was canceled. It's hoped the KLA will trade its military role for a civilian one. The Bundeswehr is well aware that a confrontation with the KLA could endanger an already fragile peace, but it's unclear how an underground army should be dealt with.
I can't say anything definitive about the role of the KLA. There are many different opinions. First comes the UN resolution, which clearly states demilitarize. I'll say again that demilitarizing does not mean disarming, not necessarily. Paragraph 15 of the UN resolution says that a treaty must now be negotiated, but those haven't been signed.
The German soldiers patrolling their sector in southwestern Kosovo around the clock still have no legal mandate to actually disarm the KLA. The rules of engagement so far state that individual KLA fighters may only be disarmed if they become a threat to others.
I've been stationed at the border. We had to convince the KLA that we were now in charge of the border. That went off without a problem. They were actually very cooperative.
The Serbian population of Prizren is not convinced by NATO reassurances that it will protect them from the KLA. When the ethnic Albanians began to return, almost all of the Serbs packed their belongings and, escorted by Bundeswehr vehicles, began to leave Kosovo.
The Kosovo Liberation Army are patrolling the streets of Prizren, fully armed. They pose as a protecting force and have even taken over a Yugoslav army base. The men are full of confidence, and so is their area commander, Reksa Ekrem, better known as Drini. He told us the town was now fully under KLA control.
This is going to be an example for all Kosovo, because this is the first city, and Prizren is the first city who is in KLA, under the KLA control. Until now, everything is going smoothly and nice.
But what the KLA calls going smoothly could become a headache for KFOR. Thousands of Serbs are leaving, and there are reports of Serbs being killed in revenge attacks in the provincial capital, Pristina.
We believe there were at least 1 or 2 incidents involving attempted abductions. We're still trying to get all the details together.
So far, KFOR has not been given a direct mandate to disarm the KLA. The underground army had no role in the Kumanovo talks when conditions were set for the withdrawal of the Yugoslav army. The unsuccessful peace plan brokered in Rambouillet did foresee the disarming of the KLA, but that agreement fell by the wayside. Now the crucial wording comes from the UN resolution on Kosovo, which calls for the disarming of the KLA and other armed Kosovo Albanian groups. But the talks on how to achieve this are still going on. A key negotiator, German Foreign Minister Joschka Fischer, says disarming the KLA is a must.
The goal is to bring democracy to Kosovo, to make it worth living in for all men and women there, irrespective of their ethnic background. That means putting the violence behind us and establishing the basic principles of democracy.
Fischer says the KLA has to develop from a military force to a political one. He and other NATO leaders know that an armed KLA patrolling the same streets as KFOR would endanger the possibility for a lasting peace.
Been taken over by Serbian paramilitary police. The chilling evidence discovered in the cellar proves beyond doubt how prisoners were interrogated and then tortured. Vital evidence for war crime investigators was left behind by the police, who hurriedly fled the building before they could destroy documents, photographs, and implements of torture. Young children had been numbered and photographed standing to attention. What horrors occurred next may never be known. British soldiers who've been sent in to guard the evidence, including spikes, batons, broken baseball bats, and even axes. Swords and knives were also found, as well as black hoods and masks. In an adjoining room, there was an assortment of knuckle dusters, and a chainsaw had been left standing on top of a blood-stained table. Former prisoners have told army officers that many who were taken away for questioning were never seen again.
We believe this to be a paramilitary police sector headquarters, and it's clear from what we found inside the building that there are a number of weapons, a number of knuckle dusters, knives, and it would appear that certainly interrogation has taken place here. And from the stories we've heard from local people, we believe that torture has also taken place here.
As some of the items were taken away for forensic examination, officials at the Ministry of Defence said there was now evidence of many more atrocities committed in Kosovo, thousands of people slaughtered in scores of massacres.
Tragically, our estimates of the numbers of innocent men, women and children killed will almost certainly have to be revised upwards. According to the reports we had gathered, mostly from the refugees, it appeared that around 10,000 people had been killed in more than 100 massacres. The final toll may be much worse.
The first forensic team from the UN War Crimes Tribunal will enter Kosovo tomorrow. Terry Lloyd, ITN.
A car bearing a Serbian registration number was targeted by a sniper who opened fire on the vehicle from a nearby apartment block, according to a NATO officer. The car's driver had been motoring through the centre of the Kosovo capital. The area was sealed off by British paratroops as other soldiers attended to the injured man. The incident reflected the danger of life in Pristina, which is said to be awash with guns. It'll also reinforce the concerns of many Serbs about their safety. The victim of the shooting was taken to hospital, where he was said to be in a serious anybody else in. Amid all the horrors being uncovered in Kosovo and the violence still being perpetrated, this standoff appears increasingly irrelevant to efforts to stabilise the war-torn territory. Graham Leach, Sky News.
The smell of desperation bordering on panic. Serbs fleeing Pristina. The few buses going north to Serbia were besieged and families split up. And in direct contrast to the enforced exodus of Albanians by rail south to Macedonia in the past 2 months, the Serbs are now trying to find northbound trains. And a few hundred yards from the station, an example this afternoon of the random violence. Lying next to his car, a young man. The parachute regiment's quick reaction force went in.
Stop the traffic down there!
He'd been shot while driving in from a western suburb.
Shooters come from that direction down that way, mate, okay? So what were you doing? 2 shots in the back of the car.
The street emptied.
Right, look out now, stop
Eyewitnesses vanished. Who is shooting who at this dangerous time? The young man had taken a bullet in the stomach. He was still conscious as we tried to sort him out. I got him to tell me his name. Ahmed Hamdi, an Albanian. Not in uniform, on an errand into town, but driving a car with Serbian number plates. We couldn't understand why he became frantic when the ambulance arrived, hanging on to us, insisting we go with him. At the hospital, it was obvious why. The medical staff were all Serb. Yesterday, they'd had to be cajoled into staying by NATO. Presented with an Albanian casualty, they showed minimum interest. The Paras sent in their own people to ensure proper treatment. But how to reassure people? General Mike Jackson, the force commander, has been leading the effort.
The world has too many refugees already. I beg you not to make the number any greater. Stay at home. We will look after you.
But there are already large swathes of Kosovo bereft of Serbs. Some soldiers remain, waiting for transport out. But why don't ordinary Serbs trust NATO?
They are on the Albanian side, so they will not protect the Serbs.
And incoming fire from Albanian fighters does not help matters.
The unhappy term Albanian population. The armoured battle group went in early and fast and in strength to secure the main road from Kosovo to Serbia, codenamed Route Snake. They sped through the wasted countryside, past evidence of the final orgy of destruction by the retreating Serbs. They reached their target, the town of Porajevo, a couple of miles from the border with Serbia, with only a few rounds of small arms fire directed at them, and entered a ghost town. 40,000 mainly ethnic Albanians lived here before it became a stronghold of the Serb forces, official and irregulars. In a pincer movement from both ends of the town, the armed column, with only a few surprised-looking Yugoslav army soldiers, who have to be out of here by Sunday night looking on, had taken control within minutes. Porajevo has been wasted by the Serbs. No building has escaped their attention, and the town appeared to have been deserted by all its inhabitants. But within minutes of the NATO forces arriving, ecstatic civilians appeared as out of nowhere. It was for them the liberation of their town by a conquering army.
What's it been like living here for the past few months?
Like in the hell.
The locals had obviously been waiting for this moment and preparing for it. Amidst the joy, though, some tense moments. The Albanians wanted to move on the Serb military headquarters, still manned by regular soldiers. British soldiers had to intervene as the Serbs, understandably edgy and probably frightened, threatened to open fire. Serb military vehicles trying to escape the town found their way blocked by crowds and NATO armour. In the end, NATO soldiers had to order the crowds to go home before it got out of hand.
There is, though, another side to this story. Attacks against Serbs by the newly liberated ethnic Albanians have already started, which is why tens of thousands of Serbs are fleeing north to become themselves now refugees.
That's something NATO is trying to stop.
What we do not want is for there to be any security vacuum. And to that end, we've moved up, are going to deploy our forces throughout the area so that any attack by either community upon each other can be stopped by our forces.
For now, though, the Albanians, who've been living in a state of siege, are content for the most part to enjoy their newfound freedom. Keith Graves, Sky News, Porajevo. It seemed couldn't wait to get out of a place where, until a few hours before, they'd been feared and detested. Now the fear was gone. Once the streets had been cleared, they left town with even more haste than NATO had entered it a few hours before, once again leaving their mark. But that, for the Albanians, was, after what they've already been through, a small price to pay for freedom. Keith Graves, Sky News, Porajevo.
With ecstatic cheers from Kosovo Albanians, the British Army heads north once again, entering Porajevo. They're well ahead of schedule, seizing any opportunity to keep up a relentless pressure on the Serb forces to leave Kosovo as soon as possible. At KFOR headquarters near Pristina, as units radio in their early reports, the picture they paint is of steady progress. They are punctuated, though, by minor incidents and violence.
Today they're preparing for high visibility ops.
At the morning conference of KFOR's commander, General Michael Jackson, there is a sense of confidence about their military mission.
Have they gone actually right up against it?
No, they haven't, sir. They're in Porajevo.
In Porajevo.
They have stopped.
The belief now is that apart from stragglers, the Serb withdrawal could be completed early.
The actual withdrawal of the Yugoslav forces is, I've got it, it's done. There's just a bit of tidying up to be done, and I think we might get it done 24 hours early, which would be very good. That's the first thing. Second thing, and this right now, we've got a lot of nervousness amongst Serb civilian population. We're doing everything we can to keep them settled as much as possible.
So for General Jackson, it's now becoming an increasing concern to improve links with local people, to work towards a long-term solution.
The most difficult issues for KFOR are no longer purely military. The move-in of NATO and the departure of the Serb military have been an impressive and undoubted success. Now it's political problems, such as controlling the KLA and stopping a Serb civilian exodus that pose the most difficult and different challenge.
But stopping Serbs leaving looks impossible. When KFOR toured with Serb leaders to persuade civilians to stay, it turned into chaos. Angry and frightened Serbs blame the Milosevic government for getting them into this mess and now deserting them. Instead of reassurance, there was violent abuse. And so for all KFOR's efforts, the exodus continues, a steady stream moving past the last British Army patrol on the border leading into Serbia. Also watching were the Serb soldiers, who will no longer be there to look after them. Instead, their base is being taken over by the British Army, its new occupants welcomed with flowers. And in Podujevo, the Serb retreat continued to gather pace, columns of armor thundering through the streets, leaving Kosovo probably for the last time. Mark Leahy, BBC News, Podujevo.
Heroes welcome. So too have the rebel fighters of the Kosovo Liberation Army. But when they come down from the hills, there's a shock in store for the KLA.
Put the arms out on the road.
NATO troops, their allies in the war, are demanding that they give up their guns and give them up now.
Have to take the weapons.
This weekend, a meeting of top KLA commanders will almost certainly agree they have no choice but to surrender their weapons. A painful decision, since much of this arsenal was smuggled here at great cost.
It was very hard to bring these weapons here. We have to pass through the Albanian border, you know, and from the other borders, and many people, many of our friends has died bringing this weapon, and it's not so easy just to put your weapon like this and go. So this is one of the reasons that I think NATO mustn't disarm us.
Some KLA fighters may hide their weapons rather than hand them in. Even though the war is now over, they cannot quite believe the Serbs have gone, and getting them to surrender their arms is not going to be easy. So far, British troops here admit they've confiscated only a fraction of the KLA's arsenal, thought to total some 20,000 guns. What they do have, they take to remote fields to be blown up. The KLA asked for their guns to be stockpiled and put safely under lock and key. This is what NATO thought of that idea.
Stand by, firing now!
I think now is the time for them to come out of the hills, to bring in their weapons, to actually hand those weapons in so that we can start to move forward the process of reconstruction and regeneration.
There's still much work to be done. In the town of Prizren today, KLA fighters were forced to leave a police station they had occupied. Their weapons were confiscated by German troops, who discovered that inside, the KLA had been beating and interrogating suspected collaborators. The body of a 70-year-old man was found, handcuffed to a chair. The prisoners who were freed are lucky to be alive. There have been acts of barbarism on both sides here. Neither has a monopoly on cruelty. Ben Brown, BBC News, Kosovo.
The deal, signed by Russian Defense Minister Igor Sergeyev and U.S. Defense Secretary William Cohen, ended 3 days of marathon negotiations. At issue, how Russian troops might be incorporated into the overall Kosovo peacekeeping mission. Russia had been pushing for a separate Russian sector, while NATO, represented at these talks by the United States, had insisted Russian forces come under NATO command and control. In the end, both sides compromised. The final hurdle cleared Friday after intense efforts to sort out key details. Pending final approval, Russia will deploy a total of 3,600 troops into Russian zones of responsibility within 3 of 5 existing sectors in Kosovo, some going to the north where French troops patrol, others to the German sector in the south, and the remaining troops going to the U.S. sector in western Kosovo.
Indeed, we have found the alternative solution which will ensure such kind of deployment of the Russian military contingent that